Hello and welcome to tutorial 4 and 5 of the process redesign tool. Today we'll be talking about measures and measure plans. There is an intro presentation on the whole subjects, and if you haven't seen that so far, I recommend you having a look at that first. That helps you find your way into the subjects. Let's get started now with the tutorial. So far we have set up the tool, and on the basis of that tool we have made our first process of the current process by breaking it down into different process steps and putting that into a swim lane presentation that helps us better understand the links between the different process steps and the dependencies. With that transparency created, we identified the first potentials, let's say the first flaws within the existing process. And now we will be looking at the definition of measures for the identified potentials so that we can improve our existing process. Usually the approach to finding measures is to have a workshop with process teams. So you have your team that is usually working with that existing process, and they know best where flaws occur, where potential is, as they have been working with the process several times and have some experience. From my experience in redesigning processes, what I see is that there are plenty of measure ideas, what could be done, what should be done. And most of the time, there are too many measures suggested. And you will have to find a way to evaluate these measures and to give priorities to some of them, the ones that are the most promising, in order to work effectively with your existing capacity and not to overcharge your organization and their time budget. Once this is done, the finding of measures, of course, then you would have a conceptual meeting together with all teams, where all teams present their ideas, where all parts of the process are put together so everybody is on the same page and can help evaluate the different approaches, the different measures that are suggested, and help pick the best ones. Once this is done and you have a set of measures, then you would have to draw up a measure roadmap and align that, and this is the final commitment of the team to the measures that will be implemented. How does the tool help you? Well, we'll be having a look at the measure table and its fields. We will have a look at the decision-making concepts that help you decide which measures should be given priority. We will also have a short look at the metrics and the calculation that is behind these concepts. We will have a look at the graphs that make the priorities visible. Then we will have a look at the measure plan, at the different implementation levels, and the recommended documentation. The measure table is the basis for the collection of the measures. The first and brief description of the problem, and of course the measure, and includes the costing information, and from that point on the decision concepts that are derived from either the costing or the time impact the measure has on the current and of course the future process. From a PDCA perspective, it's again important that the measure ID corresponds to a Kaizen flash, which is the problem or the potential. The Kaizen flash then again relates to a process, and later on we will see that the KPI that gives us some information on the effectiveness of a measure, can then also be related to the before mentioned. In the end, we have the plan, do, check, and act cycle fully implemented because we see the effectiveness of a measure to a current process and how that solves the potential or the problem that has been identified. In the costing portion, at least one of the fields is calculated, and that is the cost, the annual cost of the actual or of the current process. That costing concept will be explained later on, but you will be asked in the same measure table to also supply the annual costs of the new process. This is something you will have to calculate manually, and you will have to also put in your expected implementation costs. These three components will then help to calculate a payback time and different NPVs. The decision concept is based on the NPVs. So we have a net present value calculation for the next 3 years and for the next 5 years. So we're looking more into the short-term effectiveness of measures. This is logic because usually processes, especially in today's world that knows a lot of fluctuation and a lot of changes, will require that process changes pay off rather quickly because they will be changed anyways within a very short period of time, and we can expect that if a process change does not pay back within 3 to 5 years, it may not be worthwhile ever thinking about changing the process at all. The same applies for cycle time reduction, which is a different decision concept. It is particularly interesting for processes that on an operational level require a lot of speed and at the same time do not put the focus on the implementation cost itself. Last but not least, if we have a stronger bottleneck in terms of capacity, it is important that the time we invest to implement a new system will give us a good payback within a short period of time, meaning that the time we save by implementing a new system will compensate for the implementation costs rather quickly. In the last in the last column, we have the priority indicator. That priority indicator is a drop-down menu that will just simply indicate whether you want to implement the measure, whether you want to put it aside for a later implementation, which is the idea repository, or whether you do not want to implement it at all. So again, the three decision-making concepts, as you can see on the x-axis, you have the different measures named by their index or by their identification number, and you can pick the ones that are most promising, as for example in the NPV 3 years by measure evaluation. You should most likely stop where the two flashes are, because this is the point that represents 70% of the total NPV, and that is, as you can see, only 6 to 7 different measures that you need to implement, and not the 20 that had been named before. So this helps a lot in picking the right ones and giving priorities to the ones that have the biggest impact. Of course, measures are not independent from each other. This is why the tool will not give you a final decision, but it will give you a couple of concepts on which you can rely in finding the first good solution. It may, however, be worthwhile that depending on the interdependencies between the different measures, that even measures that are not top rated will be implemented. You will find some information on the different metrics, so the cycle time, the payback time, and the NPV. Most of us are familiar with these concepts. If not, there is good documentation on the internet where you can find sufficient help. This is why we will cut this presentation short and not go into details with the different evaluation concepts. However, what you need to understand understand also the costing correctly is how process costs per year are calculated, and that is an easy formula. That is process time plus the error time, so quality time, times the number of participants that work on the process and the errors, times the hourly rates that was part of the base information you had to put into the tool, times the cycle, the cost per cycle of the non-personnel related costs. So to say external costs, services that you need to buy to run the process, times the cycles you run per year. This will give you the total process cost per year. Additionally, what is very important to understand, all the times that you put into the tool are based on a 24-hour day, not on an 8-hour day, not on a shift view, because shifts may differ between different entities or in different countries. So we are also considering times that are beyond the normal working day, because usually our working time is not ending if we're not at the assembly line or at a very, very standardized position. We may also have overtimes, and this needs to be captured in the process. And therefore, when you put in 1, it means 24 hours. That is important to keep in mind. Once you have decided for a set of measures to be implemented, it's clear that you need to set up a roadmap and name a responsible who is responsible for implementing and making the measure come to reality. And that's again a very easy little table that states the measure ID plus the short description, which is already drawn from the information you have provided in earlier tables. You have to name a responsible and a review frequency. Review frequency is very important. As I said, most of the time the organization is skeptical when we're talking about process redesign, and everything is more important than this process redesign. And if you're not following up on that with a good frequency, your processes of redesigning will most likely sleep in, and you don't want that. There's also a stage model or an implementation level model that is explained later on, and we need, of course, a roadmap to see until when we can close which measure. One last hint. Documentation path, you see a little purple symbol. That is the symbol of Microsoft Onenote. A terrific tool I love to use. I should make a video on that, but I won't, because there are so many already on the on YouTube and in the internet. Check it out. When it comes to teamwork and documentation, do not rely on paper. Onenote will give you everything you need and has the full integration into the Microsoft Office environment. So check it out, it will make a big difference. So implementation levels, I quickly talked about it, or at least I mentioned it. And implementation levels are commonly used in project work. I saw them being used extensively in the automotive industry, and to some extent they lean a little bit into that direction as well. What do we need? Well, we need, first of all, a common understanding of the progress we make in a project, when otherwise that is absolutely random when we ask, well, how are you advancing? And the project leader says, well, I'm on track, I'm fine, I'm almost through. Almost through is a very relative description. Whereas when you have different stages that define a milestone, you can really say this is where we are, and this is where we progress within the measure implementation. Second is the decisions are made more conscious, binding. What I mean with that, there are a couple of instances where it is important to align with the leadership and to check whether we are heading into the right direction. And usually this is when the concept is available, that we sign it off and say, yes, this is what we want to have implemented. Next is project teams get feedback and instructions. So it's not a one way, it's a two-way road. When you ask whether the concept is accepted, then you require an answer, and that makes you give you, or that enables you to have a green light and to have peace of mind that you're now able to head on with whatever you want to implement. You also have the big advantage that you have a little red line that you can follow, so no important steps are omitted. You will find exactly the same implementation levels here on the top horizontal line, and you have the dates beneath that will indicate until when, in planning at least, these fall due and should be completed. Again, last but not least, a short look into a OneNote and what it can do for you. It's more or less an online notebook with a lot of functionality that helps you organize and can also be shared within the organization. So it can be used by several people at the same time. And from my perspective, it is just simply great because it helps you prepare and look up things for your fixes, get organized within the team, and it helps you also document your steps and so on and so forth. So check it out. It's free of charge. It's online and offline available. I'm absolutely convinced from that tool. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that helped you. Next tutorial will be on the implementation of measures. So it's getting hot. It's getting even more interesting. Yes, I'm looking forward to doing the next tutorial with you. Thank you and bye-bye.